Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So you've sent us a really remarkable stack of sources. It's a collection of, over 20 fundamental skeptical challenges leveled against a core Islamic concept?
That's right, the concept of prophethood, or nubuwah.
And this isn't just a simple historical discussion, is it?
Not at all. It's an intense look at Islamic apologetics, really, spanning more than a millennium. We're looking at these core philosophical questions that, atheists, agnostics, and rationalists are asking today.
And we're going to systematically dissect how two very different streams of thought have responded.
Exactly. On one hand, you have the classical or traditional scholars, thinkers like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah, and on the other, the modern contemporary thinkers like Zakir Naik or Fazlur Rahman.
So our mission here is to move past the kind of superficial arguments you might find online and really give you, the learner, a deeper, more nuanced understanding of these responses. We are tackling the core paradox. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent, why on earth would he need a middleman?
And that challenge, why an intermediary, is basically question one in your sources. It forces theologians to explain why God does things a certain way.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The classical reply is rooted almost entirely in God's wisdom, which they call hikmah, and his boundless mercy, or luf.
So the argument is that direct communication wouldn't be a blessing, it would be a cataclysm.
Precisely. They argue the sheer magnitude of God's direct manifestation would it would completely overwhelm our human capacity. We are finite creatures. The sources bring up that powerful Quranic scene where...
Oh, the one with Moses on the mountain.
That's the one. Moses asks to see God directly, and God responds by manifesting to a mountain. And the mountain just crumbles into dust.
It's a perfect rhetorical tool, isn't it? It shows that the human vessel just can't handle the unmediated divine presence.
So the intermediary becomes an act of mercy, not inefficiency. It shifts the problem from a lack in God to a limitation in us.
Right, but the modern thinkers, they come at it from a totally different angle.
A very different one. They emphasize free will. If God communicated so directly, so overwhelmingly, belief wouldn't be chosen. It would be compelled.
So instead of being hit by a thunderbolt, it's more like receiving structured, gradual lessons, like a course.
Exactly. Thinkers like Javed Ahmed Ghamidi use that exact analogy of a teacher. The prophet is our guide, using persuasion, using structured lessons. This keeps the whole test of faith and free choice intact.
That focus on free will leads us right into the next big challenge. Question 2. Why trust this perfect message to flawed, fallible human beings? Isn't that a weak link in the chain?
This is where they bring in the concept of infallibility, or isma. The classical scholars, they had to defend the integrity of the messenger.
Okay.
So they argue that prophets are specifically chosen and purified by God. They're protected from making major errors, especially any error related to passing on the revelation.
But hold on, if a prophet is protected from major error, doesn't that make them a little less human, less relatable? It feels like it undermines the human exemplar argument we just talked about.
That is the tension, absolutely. And someone like Ibn Taymiyyah would argue that protection is very specific to conveying the divine law, not necessarily every single personal action. They're human, so the message is relatable.
But their actions related to the law are divinely guarded to ensure accuracy.
You've got it. It's a functional safeguard. And the modern response, it adds this ultimate safety net, the preservation of the message itself.
So it's not just about the person anymore.
Right. Modern apologists really emphasize this mechanism called mass transmission, or tawatur. The idea is that the Quran was passed down by so many independent, diverse groups right from the start that changing it intentionally became, historically impossible. The text, in effect, becomes its own guardian.
Which makes the message future-proof, no matter what happened to the messenger. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. If the message is so important and so protected, how do we verify it's authentic? And why did the whole system just stop?
And that's segment 2. Question 3 is all about verification. Classically, you'd rely on a few things: verifiable, public miracles, mujizat, plus the claimant's moral character and the rational consistency of their message.
So we're talking about things like raising the dead, healing the sick, things that just defy the known laws of nature at the time.
Physical, undeniable manifestations, yes. But the modern reply argues that the primary, enduring miracle isn't a temporary event. It's the book itself. The Quran's inimitability, or adayas, is the sign that lasts.
Let's pause on that word ajaz. It's critical. What makes the Quran inimitable in a way that someone could actually verify?
Well, it's looked at in a few ways. There's the linguistic side, its rhetorical depth. supposedly surpassed even the greatest poets of 7th century Arabia. There's a structural coherence, despite it being revealed over 23 years in all sorts of different situations.
And I think the sources also bring up the argument from circumstance, right?
They do. Someone like Said Nursi would emphasize the logic of it. An illiterate man in the desert produces this text that reshapes civilizations and holds together legally, spiritually, and historically. The ethical depth and the historical impact become the proof.
It's a fascinating pivot. You're basically asking the skeptic to stop looking for a magic trick and instead analyze the document's quality and impact.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the finality of it all. Questions 4, 13, and 14. Why did this dynamic chain of prophets just end?
Classically, the answer is simple, definitive. Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. The sources state the message is now complete, it's universal, and it's preserved. So no new prophet is needed. The vehicle of direct revelation has parked permanently.
And ongoing guidance comes from scholars, the ulama, using reasoning.
Right, through a process called ijtihad.
But of course, the contemporary skeptic raises the technology argument. If you needed prophets in the Iron Age, surely now, in the age of cameras and global communication, would be the perfect time for one.
The modern defense hits this head-on. Thinkers like Zakir Naik argue that technology is, frankly, irrelevant to belief. If someone showed up today and performed a verifiable miracle on camera,
people would just shout CGI or deepfake or secret government tech.
Precisely. The problem isn't the method of communication. It's the posture of the skeptic. Technology doesn't get rid of doubt. It just provides new excuses for it.
So the core function of prophethood is seen as fulfilled. The intellectual miracle of the Quran is what's left, and that's something that invites modern scrutiny.
It does, unlike a temporary sight that's gone the moment you turn the camera off.
Okay, now we have to turn to what might be the toughest challenges for a modern audience. Segment 3, the ethical and historical questions.
These are crucial. Question 7 tackles the problem of evil. If prophets are messengers from a benevolent, all-powerful God, why didn't they stop famines, floods, or other tragedies?
How do the traditional thinkers handle that?
Classical scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, they frame tragedies as tests, imtihan, tests of faith for believers, or they're seen as the natural consequences of human free will.
So the idea is that God set up stable natural laws.
The Sunan Allah, yes. And prophets are sent to give moral guidance, not to constantly break the laws of physics every time a human makes a bad choice. Their message isn't a magic shield.
And the modern view reinforces that.
It does. It says prophecies about our spiritual and moral response to suffering, patience, charity, justice. It's not about removing suffering entirely, because that would just negate the whole point of free will in a stable universe.
Okay, next up is question 10. This is about apparent contradictions or cultural bias in the texts.
The classical reply here is all about hermeneutics, the science of interpretation. Apparent contradictions, they say, get resolved when you understand the context, the tafsir, and the nuances of Arabic idiom. And they introduce the concept of abrogation, or naskh.
We should probably define naskh clearly. What does that mean?
Naskh is essentially a legal mechanism where a later revelation on the same topic replaces or modifies an earlier one. The scholars don't see this as a contradiction. They see it as methodological perfection.
Like a gradual reform.
Exactly. The classic example is the ban on alcohol. It happened in stages over several verses, allowing society to adapt. It's seen as an evolution towards the ideal, not an inconsistency.
And the modern thinkers, they also have a way of addressing this, right? By splitting the message into two parts.
Yes, and this is so important for modern relevance. They distinguish between the eternal core teachings, things like justice, monotheism, compassion, and the culturally conditioned material.
The vessel versus the water.
Perfect analogy. The specific language, the local metaphors, those were the vessel needed to deliver the principles to 7th century Arabia. The vessel can be historical, but the water inside is timeless.
This careful balancing act really sets us up for question 15, which is probably the most sensitive. The regulation of practices like war and slavery. How did the sources handle this without us taking a side?
We have to be very strict here and just report on how the texts are interpreted within the tradition. Classically, context is everything. The rulings on war and servitude are seen as regulating and mitigating practices that were already harsh and widespread at the time.
So it's about mitigation and movement, not creating these practices from scratch.
Precisely. For slavery, the sources say the rules mandated rights for slaves and heavily encouraged freeing them as an act of virtue. The idea was to put the practice on a path toward abolition, even if it wasn't immediate. For warfare, There were strict ethics dross and bellow about protecting non-combatants and treating prisoners, which stood in sharp contrast to the norms of the time.
And the modern response takes that trajectory and runs with it.
It does. It connects back to those eternal core principles. Modern scholars argue the intent of the message was always toward universal dignity and equality. They see those historical passages as gradual reforms for their specific time.
So the higher principles of justice and dignity are what matter today.
Yes, and they strongly cite the principle, there shall be no compulsion in religion, as the ultimate governing idea that prohibits any kind of coercive or genocidal intent.
That distinction, historical context versus enduring principle, is such a critical takeaway. Let's move to our final segment on internal conflict and universality. Question 18. If the message is so clear, why so many denominations and conflicts?
Classical scholars would say the core theology, the usual, is perfectly clear: monotheism, prophethood, etc. They argue the divisions come from human factors: ego, politics, or just deviating from the clear path.
So the prescription is perfect, but the execution is human.
That's the argument. And they'd add that some diversity in secondary legal matters, ikhtilaf, is actually natural and not a failure. Modern thinkers agree, adding that many of the worst divisions were political or colonial, and they call for a return to rigorous, independent reasoning, that ED had to overcome it.
And finally, question 20, the geographical limitation. If it's a universal message, why were the prophets all clustered in the Middle East?
The classical answer was that prophets were actually sent to every nation. Some sources say 124,000 of them, but historical preservation just favored the Abrahamic line.
But the modern reply is much more strategic, almost geopolitical.
It is. It frames the Arabian Peninsula as the global hub of the 7th century world. It connected Africa, Asia, and Europe. It was the most efficient distribution point for a global message.
And the proof is in the outcome.
The proof is in the outcome. The rapid spread to Persians, Turks, Africans, and Asians shows the message transcended its birthplace. The location was about maximum outreach, not exclusive bias.
So before we wrap up, let's just synthesize the primary difference between these two traditions we've been looking at.
I think it comes down to their core mode of defense. The classical defense relies on divine majesty and theological necessity. It's all about God's unchanging wisdom and protecting the limited human. The modern defense, it relies on coherence and contextualization. It uses the tools of modern thought history, science, ethics to show the message is consistent and still applicable.
They're defending the same fortress, just with different architecture.
That's a great way to put it.
That was a tremendous deep dive. We've gone from the basic necessity of intermediaries all the way to these deep ethical challenges, giving you a much more robust understanding of how this theological framework defends itself.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner?
I think the sources point to a really profound implication about the end of prophethood. Its cessation could be seen not as God abandoning humanity, but as humanity reaching a kind of intellectual adulthood. The finalized, preserved guidance of the Quran shifts the ultimate responsibility for interpretation and application entirely onto the individual and the community.
Which raises a final question for you to think about. The instruction manual is complete. How does your responsibility change when the intermediary is gone and all of history is now relying on your community's independent reasoning?